Good morning, Paul. It's Friday, the 21st of October. Here's the heads up brief for today.
Thanks, Uday.
So, the Election Commission in Malaysia announced that the next general elections will be held on November the 19th. Now, there's three major coalitions, several state parties that will have influence, and a lot of instability. The floods could also disrupt elections if they occur. So, it's a really messy situation, but we're keeping an eye out on the developments.
Thanks.
In Indonesia, authorities are preparing security for the Group of 20 summit in Bali in November. Nearly 20,000 joint forces from the military and police will be deployed to Bali.
They do those really big events. The security forces for a known event. They do an extremely good job in Indonesia. It's those peripheral issues that they struggle with. Go ahead.
All right, Paul. Well, the government in Singapore has set up a task force to counter rising ransomware threats against businesses. So they've told businesses to be careful and update cybersecurity protocols.
Okay, thanks.
In Thailand, authorities are investigating a police sergeant for stealing nearly 100 guns from a station in Nonthaburi. He is suspected of selling most of the arms for private personal profits.
Thank you.
Now, Paul, Australia will allocate 26 million US dollars to fund to support police in the Solomon Islands. Now, this is to offset China's growing influence in the region and the Solomon Islands specifically.
Hopefully all that money doesn't go into sending Aussies abroad on 50 times the salary and with a heap of allowances and create a massive amount of jealousies and actually create a bigger problem than it's trying to solve.
Okay, well, that remains to be seen, Paul.
As you say, they fund police deployments as
Yeah.
opposed to provide direct support to them to improve their police force. That's always of a concern. That's been a real issue in PNG, the jealousies created by the Aussie guys that are so well paid, so well equipped, and then they get massive allowances, wonderful houses. The guy that's challenging to do a job where his life's at risk constantly um, finds it hard to learn from someone that's what they perceive to be living in a very strong position, not understanding their problems. So go ahead, mate. Sorry to interrupt you.
No worries, Paul. Thanks a lot for that. Moving over to South Asia, in Pakistan, two terrorists from the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan were arrested in Islamabad, the capital, on the outskirts of the city. Now, this is worrying because the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan has been trying to set up
Yes.
networks across the country, and the peace talks and ceasefire with the government have failed.
Okay, yeah, that's extremely interesting. A powerful indicator of how that's emerging. Thank you.
Yep. For Sri Lanka, Paul, Sri Lanka will allow foreign oil companies to enter local markets after 60 years. This is due to the economic crisis and specifically the lack of foreign reserves to purchase oil and gas from overseas.
It's a classic. I mean, so many of these companies decide getting rid of foreign oil companies is going to help them. Of course, they underestimate the technologies and the efficiencies that comes with having done this for so long, and also, of course, they make themselves vulnerable to other entities that are helping local oil companies, but they're actually from less than desirable governments that are even worse than the greed of some of the Western oil companies. Thank you.
Yeah,
Very interesting twist in Sri Lanka.
yeah, definitely, Paul. Lastly, for South Asia, Paul, in Bangladesh, authorities have uncovered a new terrorist group. Now, what's concerning about this group is the potential link between them and insurgent groups operating in the Chittagong Hill Tracts area, which is near the Myanmar border. So there's a flow of weapons and people in the area, and Islamist groups normally do not work with the tribal insurgent groups in those areas. So this is of concern, especially because elections are next year.
Yeah, look, it's a really complex one. That whole region doesn't greatly affect our clients, that specific geography, but it's a much wider application, that growth of that terrorist network. Thank you.
Yeah. Paul, lastly, for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa regions, in the UK, Prime Minister Liz Truss resigned yesterday. Um, she served for
It's
about 45 days, so the shortest
yeah,
serving
well,
prime
it can
minister.
it's continuing the Australian and the UK's ability to have a party and a prime minister voted in and then undermine them and try to get power yourself as a little greedy individual to save having to actually get the whole community behind you. So UK's financial woes, of course, are not going to go away by changing a PM. That's just a stunt to help the political party pretend it isn't woeful. I mean, they must have been in power in 12, 15 years. Obviously, that's about the time where traditionally when governments in the UK have a long stretch, they get to a point where they can't reinvent themselves. They can't be agile. They can't change and they implode. And I think that's where they're at now. And they're trying to mask it by a sequence of changing leaders. But clearly it's not going to be the solution. The problem is they, not one.
Yeah, I think that's a very good analysis of the situation there, Paul. And just lastly, Germany is going to increase security at LNG terminals that are under construction over the threat of attacks. This is due to the Russia-Ukrainian conflict.
Have they stated specifically what geographies they're talking about or what type of attacks, or that's all the info that's been released publicly
That's
at the moment?
all the info, Paul. They're building LNG terminals along the northern border, the coasts,
Yep.
to be able to import LNG from places that are not Russia. So,
So by ship as
yes,
opposed to
yes,
by
by
pipelines.
pipeline,
Okay,
yes.
gotcha. Okay, thanks.
All
Great.
right, Paul. Thanks, Paul. Have a nice day.
Cheers.